So the bicycle had been sitting in my storage building for many, many years because the steering head was broken. Where the handlebar connects to the fork was a broken tube in there. And so I just left it parked for a long time and kind of lost interest in it. And then I made the mistake of telling Cliff about the bicycle. So he said, man, you need to bring that up there and tell people about it. So my ex-wife had left behind this old bicycle, and I decided to hack it up and use the tube from it to repair this bike. And that's the chain. It's called a skip link chain. I think they made them before World War II. So that's when I pulled it out of my storage building, and I looked at that chain. I thought, man, I just need to get a new one. But that was no way I could get a new one, really. There was one on eBay that looked about as bad as the one I already had for $50. There were some that were new old stock that were $400. So I went ahead and took that chain off, and I put it in a bowl of this great new product I found called WD-40. So I let it soak overnight, and then I pulled it out and put it on a piece of cardboard, and I took a wire brush to it and cleaned it up and put more WD-40 on it, got it cleaned up and working pretty well. It should last another 88 years, I hope. Oh, that's where that part had broken. That's the new piece I put on it. And I could see that my grandfather had repaired it once before. He put a steel tube inside to beef it up, and it broke right past where that pipe was. So that's the sprocket, and it's got heart shapes in it. And I know that when Gail Borden Munsell bought this bike, he also bought, he bought his and hers bikes. So his wife had one also, and I was just wondering if it had heart shapes in the sprocket too. The brand is called a Texas Star. I tried to find out who sold them, but I never could. I ran into a dead end there. And that's Gail Borden Munsell. That was the original owner of the bike. And when he passed away in 1934, his widow gave the bicycle to my grandfather.
And she's in the very back of the picture, next to the left of that stick.
Yeah.
Survey stick.
That's her. And that's Gail Borden Munsell. So after he gave the bike to my grandfather, I do know that my grandfather used it during World War II to ride around the island to make sure people had their lights out and their shades down, and to make sure that no light was getting out. They didn't want light coming from the shore to outline the freighters and stuff that were out in the Gulf and the tankers, to where the German U-boats could spot them and sink them. Also, my mom used to ride this to school. And I don't know if any of you, well, I know a lot of you knew my mother. She was a pretty tiny lady, and she was really tiny when she was a little girl. And the way she would ride it is she'd put her leg through that triangle-shaped area and kind of ride it off to one side. And I tried doing that, and it's not as easy as it sounds. These are some of the developments that Gail Borden Munsell did. There's the power plant and the ice plant. I don't know if he had the telephone company there yet.
It's coming.
Okay, and there's I know he had a water system. So there's a big cistern there, and I know he had a lot of water wells all around town. What year?
Like 1926, 28?
Yeah, 28 was when he started the power plant, right?
I believe so.
Okay. And he also built the wooden causeway that goes that came from Aransas Pass to Harbor Island. He could see a lot of potential in the island. He knew to to get tourists here, they needed easier access, and they needed power, and they needed running water, telephones. And so he did a lot of work, and then he didn't really get to enjoy the fruits of his labor. He died just shortly after he got all this going. So if you're kind of upset about all the tourists that come here, he's the guy that started it. So it's his fault. This is the telephone company. That building is still here over by the middle school. It was Leonard Walker's house, and she and my grandmother were good friends. They used to go together and they'd paint. She was a real good artist. That's one of Gail Borden Munsell's hot rod boats that the Farley Boatworks built for him. I think he had 4 boats built by the Farleys.
Yep, 4 speedboats, and then the Albatross.
Okay, so 5. That's one of his speedboats, and I think they were powered with an Allison V12. So I'm sure the Farleys probably were very sad, just like his wife when he passed away, because he spent a lot of money with them. That's my grandfather. He's running the Albatross. That's the big yacht that the Farleys built for Gail Borden Munsell. Okay, this is the second connection I have with Gail Borden Munsell. So the first was the bicycle that used to be his. Now I live in a hunt club house, and it's actually mine is 2 of them put together. So these are hunt club houses, and mine are 2 that are connected perpendicular to each other.
And this is part of a panoramic that, so they're right off of Cotter, and this is looking from the harbor. That big building in the background, straight in the middle, that's the Tarpon Inn. Before they added on to it in the 1940s, because the restaurant that's only 1 story burnt down. And just half of the Coast Guard station that was built in 1924 is showing on the far left. Kind of give you a frame reference.
That's my grandfather standing with the aviator sunglasses, standing behind FDR. And that is a boat that belonged to my grandfather, and he named it the Marcy boat after my mother. Same thing, just.
I like this shot because he's smiling.
Yeah, me too. Okay, this is my grandfather. He, after World War II, he was doing a little bit of construction work around here. He picked up some surplus military equipment and started doing construction with bulldozers and dump trucks. And this is the lot where we're all sitting right now, where the community center is. Okay, this is my current house about 1980. You can see kind of the 2 windows here. That's the hunt club, and then the other hunt club was kind of plugged into the side. The hunt club cottages were 20 by 20, so that made that 20 by 40. And this is before my grandparents moved into it. They were doing some remodeling. And the houses back then had kind of a flare on the bottom. And I'm not sure why they did it like that, but anyway, that's showing the flare. That's kind of the backyard.
I understand.
Okay, this is my house. This is right after Harvey. I had a mesquite tree in the front yard. Now that bird bath didn't move. And then these steps here, I had just finished building those like a week before Harvey. And I was told that if I was going to connect them to the house, I would have to have an engineer. So they were kind of freestanding, and I thought they were going to be gone. But there they were. They looked like they'd been power washed, and they didn't move an inch. Okay, this is what the house looked like when I first bought it. In 1995, it was my grandparents' house when I bought it, and it needed a roof. And So it was looking a little rough. And then this is around 1990, no, this is 2005, I think. So this is after I had it for about 10 years. Then one day I discovered some evidence of termites. Started taking off some of the vinyl siding and noticed that the house was just eaten up with them. So I had to replace a bunch of exterior walls on the house. This is an aerial photograph showing where my house, there's my house right now. There was nothing around it. Right now, next door to me is where the Best Western is, right here. And Mark Creighton's house is about right there. So I was just out there, well, this is around 1961 or 2, and there was just really nothing around there. The house was just out in the open, it was sitting like an island. Oop. Okay, and this is right after Harvey, and I had cut down that mesquite tree, lost some shingles, and that was really about the main damage I had. Okay, I'm ready for a beer.
Wait, you might have a few questions. Does anybody have any questions for Macky?
Did you stay through Harvey?
No.
Good for you.
No, I went to Beasley, Texas. My dad had a house there, and that's where I went and rode out the storm. And it went on up to San Antonio, and I decided I would head home while I was up there, and I just barely got underneath it. Otherwise, if I'd waited another day or two, I probably wouldn't have been able to, I would have probably had to wait because of all the flooding that happened. So I kind of lucked out that I made that decision to head home then.
Macky, tell us the fastest you have driven that Dodge Neon of yours.
193.5 miles per hour.
I think you're going to have to explain a little bit how you did that.
So there's an event that happens twice a year called the Texas Mile, and I decided to take my Neon there about 10 years ago for the first time. And at that time, I had more like a stock motor, but a few bolt-ons, and it went 169, and all these people were just blown away. They could not believe a Neon could go that fast. And each year I got kind of addicted to it, decided, I'd make the car a little faster each year. And so it was 2019 that I ran 193.5, and I thought, man, I need to hit 200. So I decided we switched the fuel to E85 and did some dyno tuning. We picked up about another 80 horsepower and 100 more foot-pounds of torque. So I was making 640 horsepower and right about 600 foot-pounds of torque out of this little four-cylinder. And so I went there to do my 200, but ended up blowing the head gasket. So now I've got a new motor put together and learned a lot from my mistakes. So hopefully I'll hit that 200 next time I go. Okay, is that it? Anybody have a question or? Yeah. I'm not sure, but I could see that it had been repaired several times, and it was. You would think something built that many years ago would be a lot beefier, but the tube that I got out of that donor bike that belonged to my ex-wife was much thicker wall, so it must have been made in China, I guess.
Tell them about the piece of wood, too.
Yeah, so if you see on the front fork, I have a stick in there, 1x2. And when I was a little kid, that's my first memories of that bike, were my grandfather taking me for rides on it. And he put my feet on that 1x2, and my little butt would be on the handlebar. And then I'd reach back and grab hold of the handlebar, and he'd take me for rides on it. Of course, there, no helmet or anything like that. Probably no shoes, but I survived. Okay, I'm ready for that beer now. So.
That was great, Macky. It's hard to believe he never spoke before. Macky he's got a great sense of humor. When I first, the Matthew family took me in when I first came here 48 years ago on a visit with Matt, and then moved here 44 years ago. And one of the funniest things I ever thought I saw was that Macky did was, I came one time and there's a bunch of people doing some painting on their house. And I came up and I was in the oil field and I'd just come in for just a few days. And everybody was running around the house in this very frantic style. And I came up to the house and Mike Bavosa came up to me and goes, "Did you hear that? Can you hear that? Can you hear that? Somebody's yelling for help. We can't figure out where they are." And they're running around, and we think it's somebody next door maybe locked in or something. And I look up on the roof, and Macky is on the roof hollering into the vent pipe for the bathroom. So I knew that sense of humor might show up. And also you might have noticed that just like his grandfather, he can build and fix and repair anything. And if you see the work he's done on the Ram Charger, it's just incredible that you wouldn't believe what it looked like when he started and what it looks like now. So now we have Jimmy Gates to talk next, and a very different perspective, but also raised on the island, and his parents have a history with the town, and I don't want to spoil anything, but a very different sector, and I've got a few pictures that I can show because he's going to talk a little bit about Shorty's. I didn't do a slideshow, I just have them loose because I could not find one picture of Shorty's in our archive. And he'll tell you a little bit about why there aren't that many pictures. Of course, there was recently when they moved it, but it's just an incredible fisherman, historian, and just a great guy that knows a lot about what happened with the history of the flats. And of course, only lives a few blocks away from the flats and from here. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy. If you want me to show a picture, just let me know.
Hi, thank you. And thanks to everybody that participates in the Historical Society here. It's really something because there's not much left and we've got to keep what we got. And since we don't have that much, we have to make a lot of this shit up. So this is what happens when you come to Port Aransas. So all you people who've bought new houses here, just bear in mind. Are there any Ron White fans out there? I mean, because, yeah.
Let me start on a happier note.
I had, let's see, what do you got there?
That's that picture you sent me.
Yeah. Let's see. I know this is pretty complicated, but how does it work?
So if you want to use the laser.
Yeah, I do.
It's this green dot right here.
Huh?
The green line.
The green one.
Yeah.
Let's see. Right here, you will see this building. And I believe, as best we can ascertain, is this was the old Port Aransas Club. And the old Port Aransas Club was the place that my grandmother and grandfather, when they came down here from Merkel, Texas, well, they came from New Mexico by way of. This is the building. And that's the original building. The building that Shorty's now is not the original building. Don't let them bullshit you. Because we rebuilt that pool hall twice out of scrap. After Hurricane Carla, when it destroyed the original building, there was leftovers from that and some bits and pieces that when stuff was laying around, you just used it after a storm. Serious. And so that's what that's the way that worked. But it's on the same location, and that was the property that was leased from Bill Ellis. And my grandmother first licensed the place in 1946, and that's when it went from the Port Aransas Club to Shorty's place. And the reason it became Shorty's place is because everybody just called it Shorty's, because Shorty was the person that ran the joint. And the original building had 3 pool tables and 2 snooker tables, a kitchen in the back, and a small room to where my grandfather, Mac, could lie down, because he was a World War I veteran and had been injured in the war. And so every now and then he had to go and lay down.
And that's him right there on the picture. Can you all see the picture okay?
I believe, to the best of my estimation, I may be wrong about this, but I'm thinking that this is Yancey Gillespie.
Yeah. No, I was talking about the picture on the easel.
And,
I was talking about the picture on the easel. That's Shorty. And
that's Shorty, and that's Mac. And that is their first jukebox. And I don't know if it was the first jukebox in Port Aransas, but it was their first jukebox, and that's what really matters. And I still have that pool rack. So it probably should be in the museum. But, you know, I mean, growing up, I was in the 3rd grade. I used to come down after school. I'd get out at 2:30, and I would come down and rack balls there on the pool tables. And so by that time of the day, most of the fellows that were running charter boats and that sort of thing were the old fishing guides. They were in there, they'd be in there shooting pool. And so that's where I got exposed to those people, and they ruined my life. I wanted to be a fisherman. So, you know, it was like from there I got jobs being a deckhand, actually my first jobs were like going down and washing the boats, and which is where all good deckhands start off. You got to learn how to wash a boat first. And we had that place, and then we had the place next door. In 1953, my father built the place next door, which is still standing. It's a cinder block building that was the Rod and Gun Club. And my father had come down from, he was East Texas boy. He was out of Hemp Hill. Everybody here knows where Hemp Hill is, right? Yeah. Anyways, Dad went off to war, went into the Pacific, and when he came back, well, he took his discharge in Honolulu. And the only thing that he knew how to do was throw dice and fight. And so he got a job in a place in Honolulu, running a blackjack table and bouncing. And when he came back to Texas, he went back to his East Texas roots and decided he didn't want to live dirt floor poor anymore like everybody did there and work in a sawmill. So he went to Galveston. With his abilities that he had acquired in the war, those 2 things that I mentioned, he started running, working the gambling operation over there in Galveston. And it wasn't long before the law enforcement decided that it was best that that stopped. And so he did the obvious thing and headed south, which is what I've done myself. And so Dad came down and he got to Corpus Christi and he went to work for a man named Doc Mason. And Doc Mason had a high-end gentleman's club in Corpus Christi. And in the history of Corpus Christi, he's well known. And he told my father after a year or so there, he said, "Young man, there's a fortune to be made over there in Port Aransas. And a young, enterprising young fellow like yourself, go on over there and go to work for Mr. Cox." So my dad went to work for Jimmy Cox. And when he got there, he met this beautiful waitress who was a widow and a single mom who had lost her husband in the war. And she was working for Aggie South. And Dad went to work at La Balinese, running the gambling tables there. And that's where it pretty much started. And somehow or other, in a short period of time, he accrued enough money to build a nightclub of his own. I don't know how that worked out, but anyways, you know. This is an interior shot here of La Balinese, and as you can see, it was a pretty flash place, and people tended to dress well there. And the reason they did was because they were mostly pretty flash people. You know, it wasn't uncommon for there to be, you know, legislators and judges and well-to-do people in the oil industry and whatnot. And that's the way it worked in Port Aransas in those days. The clientele were people who could afford to come down here, and they hunted in the daytime if it was duck season, and they fished during the daytime if it was the summer, and the rest of the time they minded their own business. And these photographs, the reason that there's so few photographs from the interior shots of the places back in those days, there was a standing rule that you just did not bring a camera into any of these places, because, you know, people were on vacation and they weren't real, you know, it was before the internet, okay, when people still had privacy. And so, and they respected that. But this went on for a while, from the late 40s to 53, and my father moved across the street to the Rod and Gun Club after he had built that. And Shorty continued on, her and Mac continued on with the pool hall and the pool and dominoes. That was a big deal there. And what more can I say about that, except that I was there as a kid growing up. I was born in 53, and I didn't really have any contact exposure to much of any of that until I was probably, I don't know, 10 years of age. And I got to see a whole lot of that. And, you know, there's not a lot of pictures of my family in this town because we were, in all reality, we weren't related to anyone here. I was born here. Well, the birth began here, and I believe that the actual occurrence of birth took place in the back of a police car on the causeway. So, and it was the beginning of a long history. And But I wound up getting the paperwork done at the Spahn Hospital in Corpus. And that's where they named me Jimmy. And everybody insists that my name must be James, but it ain't. It's Jimmy. And Mac, my grandfather, he's not my blood grandfather. But when he first showed up here, this is where I'm going to tie in with Macky's story. Mac came down here and he went to work for the only guy that would hire him to do carpentry, because Mac was a carpenter. And the fellow that would hire him was a fellow by the name of Tom McNamara. Now, Tom McNamara was the man who married Gail Borden Munsell's widow and became the executor of the estate of both Gail Borden Munsell and, oh goodness, don't get old, you'll forget names.
Billy.
Well, I know Billy's name, but Lenneree's husband, Boone Walker. Thank you very much. And Boone Walker was a surveyor. Was as far as I understand, he was a surveyor. He came down here and surveyed a lot of the property. So anyway, between the two of those, that connection, then that's where my connection to them began, and it continued on when Tom McNamara's son, Pat, married my eldest sister. So when I say I'm not connected to any family here, it's only a matter of self-defense. We've had a lot of discussions about this, about who Pat's married to, and I always say, who's Pat's related to? I just like, man, you divorced my sister, but I didn't divorce you, so we're still brothers-in-law, right? But let's just leave it at that, because not that I have anything against anybody from here, but anyways, because I do. I got more friends here than people, the ones that are left. But that connection it's so weird that you think that would all kind of work out that way, but it did. And when my dad was in the business and kept his business running for years until he was murdered in the Rod and Gun Club, and that that left that job to my mother and I wasn't old enough to really take that responsibility because I'd been raised a fisherman. I'd always worked on the boats. That's all I wanted to do. I didn't want to work in a bar. I didn't want to be in the bar business. I wanted to fish. And I had made all those, my mentors, guys that were charter fishermen here, had got me into all sorts of different things as far as traveling and learning the real way to fish, the real way to do it. And so I pursued that career and left it. Basically, I left it to them. I left all that to the other members of my family that were interested in it. Mom took over after Shorty lost her life there in her place a couple years later. But, this old place, that's a modern picture, fairly modern picture, probably only 30 years old or something. I don't know. But
courtesy of the South Jetty.
Courtesy of the South Jetty. Tip of the hat there to
Thanks to Dan. Thanks, Dan.
Dan, yeah. And we had, the place was destroyed after Carla, as I said, and then we put it back together what we could, and I was out there as a kid, and then we went through Celia and had to go pretty much through the same thing, putting it back together out of what was left over, and somehow the clientele continued to support, and for some reason or other, people still wanted to come in there and drink beer and shoot pool and hang around. But there was never, there's a misconception, there was never any gambling going on in Shorty's. There really wasn't. It wasn't. That's not what happened. Shorty didn't stand for that. Now, people might play Kelly pool. I don't know if anybody here is old enough to remember how to play Kelly pool, but I learned how to play Kelly pool when I was a kid. But that, beyond that, and the dominoes was all that was going on in Shorty's place. She ran a really tight ship. She did not allow people to curse in her place. And likewise, my father in the Rod and Gun Club next door didn't allow men to wear hats indoors, because he said, you let a man walk in with a hat on, you know he's going to start a fight. Well, I don't know where that came from, but anyways, it was his idea, and it seemed to work pretty well. And, gentlemen don't wear their hats indoors in those days. We all remember that, don't we? If we're old enough to remember that. But then it was, I fished and I surfed, and as a kid, growing up amongst all that stuff, going back a little ways in time from where I'm at right now in this rant, just realized that all of the kids, we all played together. Our parents knew where we were all the time. We played in the sand dunes. Every one of us knew the name of every sand dune here. Every one of the sand hills here. We had names for them. We knew all of them. We knew where Cedar Hill was. We knew where Money Hill was. We knew where White Hill was. We knew where Army Hill was. We knew our way around. And it was special to us. It was our home. And the school, it's a great school. 1st through 8th grade, best education I ever got. It was. The guys there, my 8th grade teacher also started teaching us Spanish in the 1st grade, Doyle Merrick, and he was one of my mentors in sport fishing. Between Doyle Merrick, Chris Page, Lloyd Dreyer, Bill Hart, these guys were all the old Port Aransas fishing guides that traveled. Lloyd Dreyer, I give Lloyd credit for really ruining my life. Lloyd gave me the opportunity to go to the Caribbean sport fishing, and then I was gone. And so I left, and I immigrated. I went to Australia. I was gone for years, 17 years in Australia, down there fishing. And I came back in 1999, and the difference I saw in the place from 1982 to 99 was it made me understand that there was nothing about this place that wasn't going to change. That every coastal town that I've ever been to anywhere around the world, and I've been to a lot of them, I've been on boats all over the world, and every one of those places, every time I go back, they've changed a lot. So I've taken the attitude of Port Aransas that I have to pretty much embrace it and do my best to maintain some level of respect for the very core of the place while everything else goes on. And there's not a lot else. Come on, let's get serious. There's not a lot else you can do, you know. It's like people are going to do that. There's so many people. There's all this happening. And I have a lot of respect for the people that want to maintain some idea, some concept of what we actually are here and what we actually have here. While everything else is going on, we still have to have that core. And I hope all of y'all are kind of cognizant of that, because there's not. Otherwise, we should change the name of the town to another place, just like another place. and you know, people talk on and on and on and on and on, and they should all belong to a little organization that I've started. It's called On and On Anonymous. You walk in the door and they say, "Shut up." Thank you for not sharing. So I've run out. Have anybody got any questions about that? And don't be afraid. It's all right.
I'm way back there.
Hey, Don.
What year did they shut the gambling down?
In 1964, the Texas Rangers came into the Rod and Gun Club and demanded that my father show them how to take the crap table apart, and my father refused, and so they finally worked on it for a while and got it out the door and got it out in the parking lot, and they set it on fire. But prior to that, you know, the process worked sort of like the ferry operators would call in advance and let them know if there was anybody coming on that looked like the painter in if there was a ranger coming or anything like that, then that's what. And there was the Nueces County Sheriff that was actually my godfather. So, Johnny Mitchell. God bless Johnny Mitchell. He put my sisters through college. Because if he hadn't let my father continue, then my dad probably wouldn't have been able to pay my sister's college education. And so, yeah, that was in the 60s up until now. Let's get another thing straight. There was pigeon shoots here, and a lot of us might be able. Some of us might remember the pigeon shoots, and that was when the Sportsman's Club of Texas set up down there on Access Road 1. They had fenced off, caged up, live birds. Columbari from Mexico would come up, and the guys that showed up to shoot were not shooting cheap shotguns. These guys were the real deal. And you know, I mean, like, you go down there and there were people shooting Krieghoffs and stuff. And we would get all the kids from school, would go out, all the boys from school would, and some of the girls probably, would come down and we would work as flaggers and bird chasers, you know. So that was a serious gambling operation. It was completely out front. So the gambling here really didn't stop when they shut down the gambling at the Rod and Gun Club, because it continued on. And of course, that didn't stop my father from running a gambling operation because he became mobile at that point. And so that's the best answer I could come up with that one, Don.
Could you tell us how sure you lost your life?
I can. I don't really want to, but I can. There was a young man came in there and tried to rob her in the middle of the day, and she was in there by herself. And she refused to give him the money, and he beat her to death with a pool cue. And then took the keys to her car and the $14. It's a disputed number, $14 or $17. And got in her Ford and took off down the Island Road. And local law enforcement stopped him halfway down the Island Road, headed south, and he went to prison. He was tried as an adult, sentenced to life, served 42 years, and was finally released unbeknownst of us, because every time he came up for parole, we protested it, and less than a year after he was released, he murdered another grandmother and then slashed his own wrist and bled out on the floor of a cheap motel in Port Aransas. So there's that story. The man that murdered my father in the Rod and Gun Club 2 years prior to that had been arrested and charged with murder 4 times. And he was eventually he was caught in, I believe it was Weatherford. He was arrested in Weatherford for robbing a liquor store while he was coming out of a liquor store with a paper sack with a paper sack in one hand and a pistol in the other, and a deputy sheriff in Weatherford saw him coming out the door, and he apprehended him, and as soon as they ran his name, the Texas Rangers said, "We want that man." And the Rangers took him out of the county's control, and he wound up in the Rusk Mental Institute for the Criminally Insane in Austin, Texas, and he was, I believe, the last man to be what's the word for it when they stick those needles up above your eyes into your brain box?
Lobotomy.
I think he was the last man to be lobotomized in Texas. But anyways, that's where he ended that's the way that story ended, as far as that's concerned. But my father was a decorated World War II veteran, and he was a guy that didn't know how to do much other than, he knew how to gamble and he knew how to take care of business. And he was a philanthropist in this town. And I don't want to sound like I'm bragging about it, but my dad helped a lot of people in this town, but he always insisted on no one knowing about it. And he was very, very quiet about that. But we were the black sheep, in this town, because we were in the bar business. And, that's that whole deal. Port Aransas is a quiet, sleepy fishing village. No, it wasn't. There was a lot of stuff going on here, and the clientele were not local people. The clientele were people that came here. We were in the entertainment industry. And so, my family didn't really quite honestly didn't really fit in with the most of the families here. My mom ran the bar at night, went down there early in the morning, cleaned it up, set the bar up, did all that. And then the bar would open, the Rod and Gun Club would open at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And she'd work there until the 12 o'clock closing. And then she'd come home, still wide awake. If any of you have ever worked at a bar, you know how, you work in a bar until 12 o'clock. It takes a little while to wind down. And so, she would get me and she'd go, Jimmy, let's go catch some fish. And so we'd walk from our house, which is right down the street here. We'd walk down to the fish, we'd walk all the way down Beach Street, go down and walk out on the Horace Caldwell Pier and fish for a couple hours. And we'd catch a few and come back, and that was lunch the next day, And life was good as far as I was concerned. We ate a lot of venison. We ate a lot of fresh fish. In the wintertime, we ate flounder. In the summertime, we ate a lot of kingfish. And, it was a little life on a little island. And I got no regrets. And y'all shouldn't either. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you made it. But it's going to be interesting to see what they do in the space where Shorty's used to be, the building used to be, because there's 2 local kids that are doing a new thing there. And it's not a tall building filled with vacant condominium spaces. It's going to be an entertainment center. And the place that they're opening that's going to be on Shorty's will be an open venue, a music venue, and they're naming it after my mom. It's going to be called Miss Rose's. Because they couldn't use the name Shorty's because that went with the build. That was part of the business. And the Rod and Gun will be, they're going to reopen the Rod and Gun as the Palm Social Club. And so some things never change, they just sort of roll over. So anyways, I've said a lot.
All right. No more questions? Oh, well, thanks.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I kind of got started in a hurry, and Macky was chomping at the bit to get up and get it over with, as he put it. But so I do want to mention, we are Port Aransas Preservation Historical Association. We have a few board members and volunteers in the audience, and of course, we really depend on our volunteers, and we're so grateful for the Winter Texans for their participation. And we know that they come from communities, and when they come here, they become part of our community, and not just and a very active and positive way, and we really do appreciate that. And this is one of the ways we kind of give a chance for our community to welcome you into ours. And also we have, we had some great snacks and drinks and stuff that was put together by Ashley Harris, our Chief Operating Officer, who does a lion's share of the work for our organization, has for a long time, was a board member for a while, and she's sitting in the back. And if you have any questions about our organization, we're trying to do kind of what Jimmy was saying. We're trying to keep some of those core values and keep Old Town alive. And it's been a struggle with the development on the island, but we're going to keep trying our best to. That's part of our mission, is to keep those things like the fine craft of wood boat building and the way people fished for a living and enjoyed and had a good time when they came here and on the beach. It's all part of that, that Port Aransas experience. So I'm going to finish up. I know we're kind of going a little long, so I might cut it a little shorter. So, as I mentioned earlier, we had Mary Jo Brundrett was supposed to be here, but she had to go out of town, and her family goes all the way back to the I'm thinking early 1800s. And we have her brother here somewhere, I think. Yep, there he is, Johnny. So, Johnny, feel free to correct me if I say something wrong. But their family was also, they became very integrally tied into our culture. They were the first taxidermists. In fact, Johnny's one of his first jobs was mixing up the stuff that they used, for when they would stuff a fish. They had the wood mounts, the wood blanks that they would stretch this fish skin over, but then they never fit perfectly, so they would mix up a batch of, and Johnny, you can correct me, because he was the one that stirred it, mixed it up, but it was like plaster of Paris and
Called the paper and say, really what it was made out of asbestos.
yes.
They used it like a putty to fill in the spaces. And,
So with asbestos and arsenic as being part of the ingredients, we're very glad that Johnny's still here. And Mary Jo is there's some great Brundretts. We just lost one this past year, but nobody's doing the taxidermy anymore, but they're still a very much active part of our community. So I'm going to, a lot of people don't realize that the town really started on St. Joe's. So I'm going to show that a little bit. You're going to have to bear with Mary Jo because she does, give you the full lineage. And then we'll jump ahead to the story of the Mary, and I'll probably stop at that so I won't keep you too long. Today's recording is Mary Jo Matthews talking about her family, the Brundretts, settling on St. Joe's and then eventually moving to Port Aransas on Mustang Island. So I'll turn it over to you, Mary Jo.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to talk about how my family got here and how they're related to St. Joe's Island and the other area islands and peninsulas, and over to eventually some of them over here in Mustang Island. My great-grandfather was George. Put this here to help y'all keep track, but George Brundrett came with the Hannah Hollandworth family. Peter Hollandworth was her father. She was 11 years old whenever they came, and we're told he's a Scottish orphan. And he was older than her, but they came over to America, first to Canada. They settled there, and then they ended up going over to Michigan. Apparently Hannah's sister married some big wig political person in Canada and stayed there. And Hannah and George got married when she was 18 years old, and 1832. No, they got married 1835. And then by 1844, they had 5 children. And George was 9, and Jed was a baby. He was born in 1844. And they left Michigan in 1844 or 1845. And my father said they took a covered wagon down here to Corpus Christi. Others think that it's more likely they took the covered wagon to the Mississippi River, took a boat down the river, then got on a steamship, came to Indianola, and then probably that would have been a more common, faster way to get here, and made their way to Corpus Christi. When they were in Corpus Christi, there's some conflicting things about what George did there, but some say he was a gunsmith or a blacksmith, but he was one of the first county commissioners, councilmen in Corpus Christi. And so he also was killed or died drowning. And there are several accounts of what happened there, but this is one of the things that I think are most likely because some of this is in his obituary. He was working as a blacksmith at the quartermaster department at Brazos Santiago at Port Isabel. He was returning home on the Blackbird schooner commanded by Captain Smith when a swift wind caused Brundrett to fall overboard. Unable to swim, he drowned. There's a lot of accounts that there was some foul play. There was other accounts that he was the captain of some boat running supplies from Port Isabel to Indianola. But anyway, in his obituary, they say at the last paragraph, Captain Smith is exonerated from any unknown problems or anything, because apparently that was really a problem. And he had tried his best to save him, and that he went for 5 days searching for his body, found his body, and took him to be his burial at St. Joseph's. So it's believed now that they moved to St. Joseph's Island, you know, and definitely living there by then. Youngest son, they had another son, Thomas, and he was born on St. Joseph's Island in 1846. So they were there in 1846. Aransas on St. Joe's was a thriving settlement before the Civil War. Early settlers during that time are John Baker, William Redmond Roberts, who married Sarah Ann, who was a bar pilot. Then Captain Bloodworth, who my great aunt Mary married, Bernard Bloodworth. And there's John Lowe, James Malin. There were the Brundretts, the Casterlines. James Babbitt Wells was one of the most prominent citizens who operated a cattle ranch there, and he had a schooner. The little Lydia Ann Channel was named for his wife, and he and his wife's daughter married my great uncle John. So they were involved in all the early things going on. And the village of Aransas was on the bay side of the island across from the pass. The pass, they brought the steamships came through the pass. They came to to Aransas, where they had a wharf, and they unloaded to lighter boats. Lighter boats took the supplies and people to Port Aransas, Corpus, or wherever they were going.
Do you want to show that on the map? I'll try to zoom in.
Yes. So, well, here, let me say something else about it first.
Okay.
Because I'm going to refer to that again. Okay, the village, okay. The pass moves south. Okay. The lighthouse was built right where the pass is. But the pass moved south at the rate of about 230 feet a year until the jetties were built, which stopped the movement of the pass. And when the lighthouse was built in 1856 or 57, it shined its beacon to the ships entering the pass. But the lighthouse now is well north of the pass. So, as you can see this. But this is the pass. This is St. Joe's. They have here that Aransas was here. It could have been a little bit higher up than St. Joe's. And the lighthouse is here on Harbor Island. And by the way, this is Lamar. I'm going to be talking about Lamar. And this is going to be Matterhorn Island, right?
Matterhorn, yes, the next island up, yes.
Yeah, and this is Cedar Bayou, by the way. I'll be talking about that.
It was big back then. Okay.
I'm going to talk about another event from 1876. But Captain John Benson brought the steamship Mary through the pass many times. He'd come from Louisiana to Aransas, and there the cargo would be unloaded to the lighter boats and taken to wherever the supplies needed to go. Captain Benson brought his daughters, Lillian and May, on that trip many times. Lillian met my grandfather, Jed Brundrett, on these trips, and they married in 1873, which is the same year that Emma got married to Ben Mercer. And then Lillian's sister, May, married Sarah Ann's son, oldest son, William Jr. May and William had two sons, Godfrey and Alfred, and she died at Alfred's childbirth, and then her mother, Sarah Ann, raised the two boys after that. But anyway, I'm going to read about the steamship Mary. On November 30th, 1876, the Mary was carrying a cargo of Christmas goods to Corpus Christi, silk, toys, wagon wheels, etc., and when it got caught in a violent storm in the channel between St. Joe's and Mustang Island. I guess I should say that. St. Joe's is what we call St. Joseph's Island when I was growing up. But so between Aransas, I guess, and Mustang Island, I could say. I don't know, Aransas didn't exist. I think this was during 1876. I don't know.
Yeah, back then they called it Pass Aransas and the area around Pass Aransas.
Okay, anyway, so it was a terrible freezing norther blowing in, stirring up the violent crushing waves, and Captain Benson tried to signal the bar pilots on Mustang Island to let them know to come through the channel. The cargo was heavy and the boat was old. He knew the seas were too heavy to anchor. And without a response from the bar pilots, Captain Benson crossed the bar alone. And he had done that many times in the past. He couldn't stay out there anymore. He needed to get in. But the boat hit a buoy and ripped a hole in her side, and it began to sink fast. The captain relayed many distress signals to the bar pilots. Finally, they noticed the signal and came to the rescue. After 3 hours of struggle to tie up the pilot boat to the ship's plank, the pilots finally transferred the passengers to the pilot boat. The livestock and the cargo went down in the ship. It was a terrible ordeal for the passengers on that smaller pilot boat to cross the bar on the violent waves. The survivors were taken half frozen to the Mustang Island pilot house where the Mercer family warmed and fed them. The Mercer's log read, "She's a total loss, both vessel and cargo." And the Mary struck at 8 a.m. and her furnaces put out 30 minutes afterwards. She settled very fast, no lives lost. And I want to read from, what's her name? Oh gosh. Oh, Mrs. S.G. Miller, a personal account that she is told she was on the boat. Apparently, after it was tossing, she got very seasick and went to her berth and was laying down. She said she didn't feel that frightened because she knows she had been on with Captain Benson many times, and she had had crossed this bar in a storm before. The next morning at daybreak, I guess they had been out there rolling, trying to get in out there for a while. The next morning at daybreak, I noticed water in my room. The next room began to crash and pull apart. There were noises all over the boat. The chambermaid said the racket was a result of the ship crossing the bar. She returned minutes later screaming for the mistress to get up. It was sinking. Apparently she didn't leave right away because her brother, she was with her brother and children. And anyway, he caught her hand and together they waded through the water and was pouring through the ship like a mighty river. And when she reached, to where her family was, they were huddled together, and the captain said he had signaled the pilot to come out across the bar, wasn't getting an answer. Then later she says, my poor horses were tied in their stalls and had to drown with land in sight. As we sat there, I could hear them struggling until the water reached them. My heart ached, for it was losing my dear, kind friends. It took the men on the pilot boat nearly 3 hours struggling in the pounding surf to tie the ship's gangplank to their boat. The children were carried to safety by the doctor and the sailors. As she started across the gangplank, there were two vessels. That vessel started to part, and apparently she fell. She thought that was the end of her, and her heel got caught in a plank, which saved her. And then she was able to scramble onto the plank on her hands and knees. And finally, she said it was an eternity before the sailors caught hold of it again, and I was helped and rescued to the vessel. She said, our trip to the small boat was another terrible ordeal. We managed to cross the bar at last with waves that were mountain high, rolling and lashing the unfortunate Mary. Anyway, that's...
Great story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, I want to talk about another event from 1876, but
And I don't want to keep you guys, I know we're kind of running a little late, but I will put this into a movie form. It'll be a separate YouTube on our YouTube channel, and of course I'll also upload what we talked about tonight. But she tells a great story of what it was like in the Civil War when the Union Army was actually staying at one of her relatives' house. Everybody had left, but this relative was, had a full family and was insistent about staying, and actually the Union Army left her alone, but they had burned most of the settlement here, which is El Rancho Mar, and burned most of the Aransas Wharf, but her house they were using as kind of a headquarters, so she actually was able to survive and actually snuck out one night on horseback, went across the pass to the north and warned that the Union was coming to her Confederate friends. So you'll be able to hear the rest of those, but I know that we're kind of running late. So if you have any questions, Johnny's the brother. He might be able to answer them. And like I say, I will have all the accounts. It really goes from when they first settled on San Jose to and including the move to Mustang Island. What's that? Next week is going to be Mary O'Rear, and she's a very accomplished author. We carry several of her books, and I think she's going to be. Mark, do you remember what the title of next week?
It's going to be on her book, which is about the island.
Yeah, so it's going to be about the island and the history of the pass. So she's very entertaining, does a great job, and she'll have a great slideshow. So thank you again for coming tonight. Yeah. Oh, no. That's got to.
Good job. Still need to get your beer.
That's a question right now. Yes. That's a question right now. I almost forgot